You are about to feel guilty for something you never did. If you're bisexual, you already know this feeling. It doesn't show up when you do something wrong. It shows up when you exist out loud. Stay with me, because by the end of this you'll understand exactly where that guilt came from, and more importantly, whose voice it actually is. Because it isn't yours. It never was. Let's start here. This guilt is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It edits your thoughts before you speak them. It makes you apologize for feelings you haven't even said out loud yet. And the strangest part? It rarely feels like guilt. It feels like hesitation, like second-guessing, like constantly wondering if you're somehow misleading people. Whether you're too much for one space or not enough for another. You start treating your own emotions like evidence that needs defending. And eventually you stop asking yourself what you feel. You start asking what you're allowed to feel. That's where the damage begins. Because modern culture doesn't always reject people directly anymore. Sometimes it just surrounds them with impossible expectations. And impossible expectations have a way of becoming internal voices. Quietly, without permission, without you noticing. Here's the first thing almost nobody says out loud. Being bisexual often means living inside contradiction. You can be visible and still feel unseen, accepted, yet constantly questioned, desired, while your sincerity is doubted. People assume clarity should look simple. So if your experience isn't simple, they start treating your complexity as confusion. Over time, you begin doing the same thing to yourself. You replay conversations. You rehearse explanations. You search for the one perfect sentence that will finally make people understand. But that sentence never arrives. Because the problem was never your communication. It was the expectation that your identity should fit comfortably inside someone else's certainty. And modern life makes this so much worse. Dating apps ask you to compress your entire emotional history into a few labels. Social media rewards identities that can be summarized instantly. Algorithms prefer certainty. And slowly, humans start preferring it too. Complex identities become inconvenient. And convenience has quietly become one of the most powerful forces shaping modern relationships. People say they value authenticity, but they reward simplicity. That contradiction changes people, especially people who already feel responsible for making everyone else comfortable. So you start editing yourself. Not because you're dishonest, because you're trying to reduce friction. You explain less, reveal less, question yourself more. Eventually, you become an expert at emotional self-surveillance. Before sending a message, you predict how it'll be misread. Before admitting attraction, you brace for the assumptions. Before entering a relationship, you're already calculating conclusions nobody has spoken yet. This constant monitoring feels responsible, mature, even protective. But underneath it, it's exhausting because you're not just living your life. You're managing everyone else's possible reaction to it. That's emotional labor almost nobody sees. And invisible labor has a way of becoming invisible suffering. Now here's the part that goes deeper than most people are willing to admit. Many bisexual people grow up hearing conflicting stories about themselves. One group says you're indecisive. Another says you're experimenting. Another insists you'll eventually choose. These messages come from strangers, friends, family, sometimes even partners. Each comment on its own seems small. None of them feels catastrophic. But repeated enough times, small doubts become psychological architecture. You stop hearing those voices as outside opinions. They become your own internal narrator. Now every decision carries weight it was never supposed to carry. Attracted to one person? Your brain asks if you're confirming a stereotype. Attracted to someone else? A different stereotype shows up instead. The experience stops being emotional. It becomes performative. You're no longer simply living. You're constantly aware of what your choices appear to mean. And that awareness steals something precious: spontaneity. The ability to feel something without immediately calculating how it'll be judged. Modern life already trains us to perform. Profiles, photos, captions, status updates, compatibility scores. Read receipts. Everything measurable, everything visible, everything open for interpretation. The result is a generation spending enormous energy appearing emotionally healthy, while privately feeling emotionally fragmented. For bisexual people already carrying guilt, this environment intensifies every insecurity, because now identity becomes another performance to optimize. You start wondering if you're representing yourself correctly, whether people believe you, whether you're even allowed to describe your own experience the way it actually feels. Imagine carrying that question every day, not loudly, quietly, in hundreds of tiny moments. If you've felt even one of these so far, comment the number. 1, 2, or 3. I want to know which one hit first. Because we're only halfway through, and the next part is the one people message me about the most. That kind of pressure changes how you attach to people. Some become chronic explainers. They answer questions nobody asked. They give reassurance before conflict even exists. They overclarify ordinary feelings. Not because they're manipulative, because somewhere along the way, being misunderstood stopped feeling like an inconvenience. It started feeling dangerous. Others go the opposite direction. They reveal almost nothing. Silence feels safer than correction. Distance feels easier than constant translation. Neither response starts out as personality. Both start out as protection. And protection has one dangerous habit. If you rely on it long enough, it stops being a strategy. It starts introducing itself as your identity. You forget where survival ends and where you actually begin. That confusion creates a second layer of guilt, because now you're blaming yourself for emotional habits that were only ever built to keep you safe. Here's another pattern almost nobody names. You become hyper-aware of reassurance. Not because reassurance is unhealthy, but because inconsistent understanding trains your nervous system to keep checking whether acceptance is still real. You notice subtle tone changes, delayed replies, different wording, tiny expressions. Your mind starts collecting evidence, not of betrayal, of possible withdrawal. This is emotional hypervigilance. It convinces you that enough observation can prevent enough pain. But relationships rarely collapse because someone missed one signal. They collapse when fear quietly replaces trust. Hypervigilance feels like preparation. In reality, it becomes a kind of imprisonment. You're never fully present. Part of you is always scanning, always predicting, always preparing for a rejection that hasn't even happened. People mistake this for insecurity. It's usually just accumulated experience. If misunderstanding has repeated enough times, your body starts expecting misunderstanding before the conversation even begins. And that expectation creates guilt in strange, quiet ways. You apologize quickly. You minimize your needs. You avoid the hard conversation. You make yourself smaller before anyone even asks you to. Because shrinking feels safer than disappointing someone. That survival strategy works. Until it doesn't. Eventually you realize something unsettling. You've become incredibly skilled at making everyone else comfortable, while becoming increasingly unfamiliar with your own emotional reality. Comfort and connection are not the same thing. Most people settle for comfort. Very few recognize what they're sacrificing to get it. Modern dating makes this worse. Swipe quickly. Judge quickly. Replace quickly. Attention has become abundant. Patience has become scarce. It comes from constantly wondering whether your existence is unintentionally difficult for someone else. That belief quietly rewrites your relationships. You hesitate before expressing attraction. You second-guess your own boundaries. You worry that your honesty will create confusion, so you speak less. Not because you have less to say, because silence feels less disruptive. But silence you protect authenticity. It slowly erodes it. People say they want honesty, but honesty without emotional safety becomes exposure. Exposure without understanding becomes loneliness. And loneliness changes how you interpret everything. Validation starts feeling like proof.